Alright, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Human Monsters. And we're doing something a little different today. Normally, I don't do a banter-based format, but I have the hosts of Crawlspace podcast on the show today. Welcome, Lance, and welcome. I'm sorry, what was your name?
Tim, sorry, I should have updated my Zoom screen here.
Oh, that's all right. So, what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to ask you if you could describe your show.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Totally. The show that you're referencing there, Crawl Space, was a show that Tim and I started. How many years after we had Missing Maura Murray going?
I want to say about a year and a half.
Yeah, about a year and a half after we had started Missing Maura Murray, and we wanted to do something that focused on cold cases as well as bringing on other people that can speak professionally about those cold cases, missing person cases, anything that was like true crime related, that gave us a little bit more freedom to explore the psychology behind why people do what they do. Also have like authors on, the chance to have other podcasters on, so, the peers in our industry. So Crawl Space was the title that we came up with, I'm pretty sure simultaneously when we were going over titles.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The is designed to make you uncomfortable, right? I think that was kind of what we wanted to get out of it. Everything you said, and with the title, something we wanted our conversations to get uncomfortable.
Well, at this point, whenever I think of crawl spaces, I think of John Wayne Gacy's house because that's where he buried all those bodies.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah,
totally. And anytime people are talking about John Wayne Gacy, they end up giving us free plugs because they always say in the
well, yeah, yeah.
crawl space.
mhm.
Yeah. And I think when we were talking about it, we're like, what's like a word that could describe like it's kind of, you're digging in, you're looking for something. It's like dark, it's uncomfortable, and you're trying to find stuff and pull, like you're trying to get like, because we're thinking like typically the conversations we have span like 45 minutes to an hour, and some of them are lighter, but some of them, yeah, we do get a little bit deeper than the guest is anticipating. So it does get a little bit more uncomfortable. Yeah, and I think I'm pretty sure I was like pulled over on the side of the road going to like a site inspection for a tent or something when we were talking about it. And yeah, it came out at the same time.
Yeah, I've been watching Amazon Prime. They have all of the old episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, the ones with Robert Stack, and I thought the Crawl Space guys must have watched that show back in the day.
Oh, for sure, of course, yeah, legend Robert
Oh yeah.
Stack and that show, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to get into this case of Sheila Shepherd, and this is a classic cold case. And it's funny because I was thinking about it. So she was found deceased by her uncle on November 25th, 1980. So I don't know how he knew she would be dead or what, but they always look at next of kin when these things happen. And
Mhm.
yeah, so what do you guys know about this case so far? Did you cover this in an episode?
We covered it in a series on Crawlspace and on Missing, which is one of our other podcasts. We went a little bit further with it on Missing. But yeah, we actually had a great opportunity to speak with the investigators, the current Saratoga Springs Police Department investigators, Matt Wilson and Chris Callahan, as well as one of the original investigators, Tom Mitchell, who's now retired, and Sheila's aunt Terry. So we spoke with all of them for this series, and we learned a lot of information. And unfortunately, not all of it is out there easily Googleable. So we want to kind of try to talk about this case as much as possible because it has like uh, things about it, I think, that would make true crime people, like the true crime community, really interested in trying to figure out who did it, frankly. And so, but that hasn't happened yet, unfortunately, for whatever reason. I think Saratoga Springs is kind of a small town. Maybe that's one reason. But it definitely is an interesting case.
Yeah, and then looking into it, it occurred to me that if you're going through an acrimonious divorce, probably the worst thing that could happen is your ex-wife being murdered because you're going to be suspect number one. If everyone remembers that you weren't getting along, uh, everything came to an end in a very uh, heated kind of aggressive sort of way with lots of fighting. Um, everyone's going to point the finger at you. And certainly her husband was a suspect, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was looked at and interviewed, and they tracked down his alibi. And based on the investigators we spoke to from the police department, I would say, have all but cleared him of any responsibility in Sheila's case. They said that it's a very good alibi. I know Sheila's family kind of feels a little differently, though. I think this guy Richard acted oddly. His behavior was bizarre after Sheila's murder, and maybe that's pretty normal. Honestly, I don't know. But some of the details don't really seem normal. Don't really seem like things I've heard before.
Well, I mean, death is something that I don't know if most people are ever really prepared for, and people can react to it in strange ways. Like one thing that happens to a lot of families, like when a parent dies, is sometimes that can tear apart a family. And some people get very entitled when it comes to the legacy and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I guess people, yeah, maybe it was just because of the death. When you're not prepared for it, that can bring out strange behavior for sure.
Yeah. I don't know if we were ever told about the alibi, like what they said he was specifically doing, other than he was seen. What was it? He was seen at a bar. The bartender confirmed that he was at the bar.
Yeah, I believe several people. I think even there was like a band playing at the bar, and I want to say
Right.
like he even spoke with the band that night. But I think the problem with it is that it's not definite what time or night Sheila was killed. It's believed that they have that info from the medical examiner, but I think there's just some potential uncertainty about her timeline.
Yeah. And when we were talking with Terry, Sheila's aunt, when we went to Saratoga and the detectives were sitting there with us, she had told us without hesitation when we asked, who do you think the number one suspect is, or how many suspects do you think there are? She just held up one finger and she was like, one. It's him. Like there'll be no dissuading her. Is it dissuading or persuading? Dissuade. There'll be no convincing her otherwise.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes that's something that you can encounter in police, with judges, with prosecutors, and unfortunately, sometimes in certain cases where medical problems could enter into somebody dying, they just won't hear of it. So, I mean, these kind of biases can certainly occur. Um, and I think whoever killed her, I think if there's a downside to true crime media being around for so long, it's that serial killers are um, they're very schooled on how to get away with these things now. They realize don't kill anyone you know. Uh, Make sure you don't leave any DNA behind. Uh, you know, and there are serial killers who have said that they read about all kinds of serial killers and learned from them. BTK, Dennis Rader, he was a fan of serial killers and he wanted to be a serial killer. Like those were his rock star idols for him. And so I would say, so if I had to posit a theory on this case, it's probably a guy who didn't know her, because there's so many fewer breadcrumbs when it comes to that sort of thing.
Well, let me push back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The investigators believe that Sheila definitely knew her killer, because there was no sign of forced entry. And also, I think there was a sheet covering her face, covering her whole body, actually. And I know that that's one thing that investigators will look to for some relationship. I don't know if there's some shame associated with that, and that's why they do that. I'm not quite sure, but that is what I've heard. The investigators were looking into the case as if this was someone who Sheila knew. She had only been back in town for 10 days, though,
Yeah,
which kind of, I would say probably limits the amount of people she came across during that time.
it's
She,
probably a short-term relationship, maybe. Maybe she just
yeah,
met him very recently, and he probably lied about, probably even about his name. A lot of these guys just they sell themselves entirely on false lives, and so that might have been what he did as well.
that's
The
possible. Yeah.
the strangest element to this, one of the strangest element to this, is that she was stabbed in her stomach right below her navel post-mortem.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I mean, yeah, there was definitely personal animus behind this. Was she sexually assaulted?
She was naked on the bed, tied with her hands and feet to the bed posts, but there was no sign of any sexual assault. And there was no sign of any struggle from her hands being tied or her wrists being tied and her ankles being tied.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you get into the psychology of these guys, clearly this is someone who hates women, and he probably also has a low self-esteem or an inferiority complex, and he wanted to have power over a woman who couldn't fight back. It's funny because there was some good timing here because there was a special on Unsolved Mysteries about what they call diabolical minds, the psychopaths, and that power is a motif in their lives. It was often robbed of them as children. One extreme example they cited was Adolf Hitler. His father was very abusive, and as adults, there is this obsession with having power over other people. So it sounds like that probably had a lot to do with the motive anyway. He wanted to put a woman in a position where she was completely powerless.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think some of those things you said ring true. But she was tied up afterwards, right? I mean,
Yeah, and there were no. It says there was no signs of robbery as well. So
right.
that, yeah,
Right.
there was no financial motive either. It was just he just wanted to hurt this woman, and then when you consider the indignities to her corpse as well, again, that's more power. It's more ownership. Like, you didn't have the chance to deny me, and even in death, you belong to me. It's not quite as extreme as Jeffrey Dahmer, but it's the same trajectory anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, the official cause of death for her was asphyxiation.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
strangulation, or do you think it was something else, or?
something else
I
like
think it was
suffocation.
a piece of her blouse was shoved into her mouth.
Oh yeah, yeah. So they just probably covered her mouth and nose and just, yeah, she just,
Yeah, as far as we know. Yeah, it is an odd cause of death to me, you know.
Yeah, it almost seems like every time you think about it, it almost seems like this is a accidental death. And then you start thinking about some of the other details. You always keep coming back to there was no signs of struggle on her hands and the knife in her stomach after she had passed. So
yeah.
what does that mean the killer did? Accidentally killed her and then made it look like it was a murder? But then if he accidentally killed her, why wouldn't you just leave? Now you're trying to make it look like it's something it wasn't. Or was you just trying to confuse the situation?
Well, I mean, it certainly wasn't anything like a contract killing, because those are typically committed with guns, and guns are so. I mean, it's almost impersonal because it's just you're not making contact with the body. This guy wanted to save her every last moment of seeing her struggle, seeing her suffer. So yeah, again, this is someone who has a pathological need to snuff out women and kill them. Um, and so it was probably, I mean, most murderers are men. And yeah, this is probably, again, a guy who has a thing against women. And moving along, so it says that he took some photographs from her apartment. So there may have been some kind of a sexual motive, but it's interesting that he would maybe he has like a collection of photos of his victims that are like trophies, because a lot of serial killers like to keep trophies.
That was kind of what we thought. And there was some conflict between the investigators, sort of the newer school approach of investigators Callahan and Wilson versus original investigator Mitchell. So we kind of got a few different pieces of info out of each, I guess. I think Callahan and Wilson were more readily open to the idea that those photos were stolen by the killer. Tom Mitchell did not say as much. In fact, he didn't really want to talk about them at all. So that leads me to think that that probably is what happened, that they were stolen. But we can't be 100% sure that they were taken by the killer. But if you're asking my opinion, I do think that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the possibility she could have just, given them away to someone that she knew. So that, I mean, that's also possible as well.
It is, but the photos were of Sheila in the time that she had spent in Colorado and in California just before she arrived back in Saratoga Springs. And I guess, and I got this information. We got this information from Sheila's aunt Terry, who spoke with Sheila's mom after she was murdered. Sheila's mom told Terry that she was on the phone with Sheila and was talking about those photos, the ones that ended up going missing. So she was excited about them, that she had them. I think she must have just recently gotten them developed. So yeah, I don't think she, I think she cherished those photos, honestly.
And did I imagine the police swept the place for DNA. Did they find anything from the killer? Any hairs, anything like that?
That is a good question because this was in 1980, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, if they have any evidence right now with the DNA technology that we have, nothing's being done because it's still waiting in the queue. That's the answer I think we're still getting, is that it's just hasn't been, it just hasn't been moved up the chain of priorities.
Well, yeah, I guess since it's a cold case, I guess that's probably why, right?
Yeah. There's some ambiguity there. I'm not sure how much of the killer's DNA they have. I'm sure they have samples. I know that there were samples of some items sent to the state lab. We don't know what they were. We don't really know if the killer's DNA was on that or how good or bad the samples were. So it unfortunately seems like this case is going to have to be worked on without DNA. As of right now, I think that's probably the only way forward, that we're led to believe. We do know there are prints. They definitely printed the apartment. So hopefully something there could turn up. But they've fingerprinted suspects in the past, people that they've interviewed, and nothing has matched as of now.
Yeah, and the process of analyzing DNA, I mean, it used to be incredibly slow. Like, I mean, they would have backlogs of years. I don't know if it's gotten faster now.
Yeah, we know this lab in Austin, Texas called Othram Labs, and you can find out information about them at dnasolves.com. They're amazing. They can turn DNA around in a matter of a couple of weeks or even less, probably. They have an investigative team there as well, to do some of that genetic work. So that's pretty. It's a great lab, but they work only with law enforcement, and a case like this already has the items that have been submitted to the state lab. So I don't think they're able to really pull them out and send them to Othram, unfortunately.
And we don't even know how the crime scene was handled during the investigation, like immediately afterward, because we were looking at the photos that they took. The detectives allowed us to look at the case file and the photos, and it just looked like what you would imagine 1980s like crime movie or like the movie of the week, where they show up at the crime scene and they're smoking and it takes the jacket off, it hangs it on the chair, and I mean that's what the pictures showed. And
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah.
yeah, so it's like who knows how much contamination was done during that time, just not being aware of what you're doing.
Yeah, sometimes faulty police work can definitely botch up an investigation. And but on the other hand, it's investigation is a difficult thing. It's a science, and without evidence, you can't bust anybody, and it can take years. Some, as I said, some killers are very methodical. They plan very well. They're not like the Crips and the Bloods who shoot people out in the street. They've got it all worked out, and this guy must have clearly gained this girl's trust so that she would take him up to her apartment. So, I mean, that's the thing about psychopaths and sociopaths. They're very good at charming people and in adopting an artificial facade, because they don't fear anyone. They don't fear the consequences. They're not afraid of being caught in a lie. So that was probably a big part of it as well.
This one, if this is the same person who killed Sheila, they were pretty brazen in that the theory is they stole flowers from the gravesite. So that's just if. That's just if.
Yeah.
So flowers were stolen from the gravesite. When we were there with Terry and the detectives, Terry had mentioned that they were stolen 2 or 3 times, I think she said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from the gravesite. And that would be a pretty brazen thing to do if it was the killer. Interesting thing about the gravesite is that it was in the last row or second to last row of the cemetery. So from the street, you're not looking in and seeing Sheila Shepherd's standing tombstone. It was just a plate on the ground as well.
And it doesn't even say Shepherd. It says
doesn't even say Shepherd, right?
Her maiden
Really?
name. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, serial killers, they like to go back and inspect their crimes, and so that's maybe the closest thing he's had to actually, so he can go back and look at the tombstone and think, this is my handiwork.
Yeah, I mean that could be a possibility. It's definitely crossed our minds. I would like to hear about what you think about that.
Well, I mean, Ted Bundy was notorious for that. He went back and put makeup on their faces and performed acts of necrophilia. And some of them don't always go that far, but they like to go back. And I think Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, might have done these things. Oh, yeah. He would go back to the corpses. So, yeah, I mean, unless it's some cheapskate who doesn't want to buy flowers. But I think most people are decent enough not to do that. So, yeah, this could be someone who's trying to send a message. Do you know if they ever conducted surveillance on her grave to see if someone was coming along? Or?
No, so this was something that came about during our interviews with Terry and the investigators. This information was never passed to original investigator Mitchell, says Tom. But he did say that that's a bit unnerving, I think, or something of that effect, about the flowers. He wondered how often that happened, even posited if they would ask a maintenance man at that cemetery to see if that's a common occurrence. But yeah, he was definitely bothered by that. And I think it seemed like he wished he had heard that when it happened. Terry, I think, said something to the effect of, this was such a crazy time. Like, I don't know if we forgot to tell the investigators that's probably why,
Yeah, vandalism does sometimes go on in cemeteries. Like, I just covered this case. Do you remember this boy named Ryan White in the 80s? He had AIDS and he became kind of a poster boy for it.
Wasn't that one with Elton John?
Yeah. He sang his funeral. And a year after he died, people vandalized his grave out of like homophobia, even though they knew by then that it wasn't a gay disease. So not everyone has respect for the dead. So so yeah, I can see this guy doing something that as diabolical as removing the flowers. Um, if
I
he was
don't know. I mean, if you were trying to do something diabolical, and what's the purpose of just removing the flowers? Why wouldn't you deface the nameplate?
yeah, that is odd. Yeah,
Well, maybe because it's something that you can repeat. Like, and I'm just going back to what Morgan
Yeah.
said earlier about the killer sort of exerting some kind of control over Sheila. First when he killed her, then when he tied her up. Well, I guess he probably took her clothes off and folded them up and put them neatly on the floor. And then tied her up. And I mean, all this, I think you're right in that spending any time with her after this person killed her is a sign of needing some kind of control, I think, right?
yeah, yeah.
And then the photos, you're trying to relive that, right? You maybe, and this is just my opinion, she probably showed this person the photos in the apartment that night, and I would bet that person took them. This is my opinion. I would bet that person took them to sort of relive that moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking at a quote here. So there was this one guy who said, um, support the fact, so positioning of the shoes in Sheila's apartment, possibly by the killer, supports the fact that this is not a violent crime scene. It's methodical to a degree. So I guess, so yeah, to them, it didn't have the classic hallmarks of a crime scene. So he killed her, but there was no blood, right?
That's correct.
There was
Yeah,
no gore.
right. And that was his point. He said that he had investigated some other murders and there's blood on the walls and on the floor and things like that. And he was like, this, was completely different.
So what? So do you know a lot about the autopsy? You mentioned that they know she died from asphyxiation. Were they 100% on that, or
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, okay? Because and then otherwise, she didn't have any intoxicants in her system or anything like that, or
Actually, she was intoxicated. Um, I believe she had like a blood alcohol level. I don't. She wasn't driving or anything that night, but I believe she had a blood alcohol level 0.25. So that's legally intoxicated.
oh yeah, yeah, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
So did they interview any known sex offenders in the area? I don't know if they had the sex offender registry at the time, but
Good question. I would say so. I don't know. I know they interviewed a lot of people in her life at that time. She was going to a school. She had signed up for a secretary class that was just down the street from her. So a lot of her life at that time involved walking from her apartment to her school, to the bars downtown, and maybe to her mom's house too, or at least to a laundromat where she met her mom, I believe. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure if they interviewed known sex offenders, but I would bet they attempted that. Yeah.
but speaking of the sex offender registry, is it just pedophiles who are in that, or do they also include men who have offended against women, adult females?
I don't really know. That's a great question. I think that's every kind of sex offense possible, even to probably animals.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think because every time we run one of those background checks, it lists it as registered sex offender or I think it says registered sexual offender.
Yeah. So, and it says that she had a broken fingernail, but that could have been, a random thing from her everyday life.
Mhm.
Women have broken fingernails, so it's probably not indicative of a struggle. I'm thinking if if perhaps she had been fighting back, she probably would have had more than one broken fingernail. That's what I'm thinking anyway.
Yeah, and I think there would have been some signs of that in her apartment. Her apartment wasn't in a condition that would be suggestive of any sort of struggle. In fact, like Tim had mentioned, things were placed neatly. Her shoes were placed neatly side by side in the clothing.
Yeah.
And even the way her body was found with the sheet covering her face, it almost feels like if she knew this person briefly, maybe from, you know, a brief encounter at the bar, and they go back to her place, and then the intentional murder happens.
Well, I mean, this is a total shot in the dark, but I'm thinking maybe they were going to have sex. Maybe that was the ruse. That he, they established that they were on the bed, and then instead, of course, of following through with it, he killed her that way. Because yeah, they said there's no signs of a struggle. They mentioned an ashtray was tipped over, but it looked like someone dumped it, as opposed to cigarettes being all over the place, and the ashtray being smashed. I don't think it was broken. It looked like someone did this to make it look like there was a bit of a sign of a struggle. So there just wasn't enough mess to suggest that there was a fight, or that she had to that he chased around the apartment. Clearly, that didn't happen.
Right. And there's another detail. So, okay, the ashtray detail is interesting because you first start thinking that this is something that happened during the actual murder, during the event that, you know, she died. But her uncle discovered her by going through the window, right? He went through the window. The door was locked. So he goes around up the fire escape through the window. She was a smoker. If she had smoked like in bed and, you know, the ashtray was right there, maybe as he was coming in, he's super distracted because there's a body under a sheet. You know, this already doesn't look good. And no one has heard from Sheila in days. And the radio is playing very loudly on her alarm clock. So there's already something wrong. Maybe he just tipped that over, didn't even realize he tipped it over from like a bedside table or something, which then leads you to the door being locked. So how did the person who killed her leave through the window and lock the door? Or did they have her keys? And then there was that rumor about the keys being found across the street.
Oh yeah, so he locked
Yeah.
the door so that nobody would be able to discover the body for a while. Maybe this guy was a transient, he wanted enough time to get out of town.
But here,
Yeah.
so it's good. Yeah, clear up the key thing, Tim, because I always
Yep.
get confused on that.
Sure. So this is another one of those details where there was we got kind of, I would say, conflicting like openness from the investigators, the newer school investigators. Like they were totally willing to share about the keys and sort of talk about it. The original investigator, I think this was a holdback originally, but again, this murder is like 42 plus years old. So at some point, some of those I think have to be let go. So I'm on team new investigator, just for the record. But so as I understand it, what Lance said is correct. The door was locked, and Sheila's uncle had to come up through the fire escape, and the door was likely locked by the killer, unless the killer killed Sheila and went out the window down the fire escape. The killer took her keys and went out the door and then locked it behind him. And then apparently threw the keys or dropped them across the street. And they were found months later, actually after the winter. So sometime, I think it was like in March, that they found the keys. And they had canvassed the neighborhood previously in November and December in searching for clues, did not find the keys. And I don't think they were like hidden all that well. They weren't like, like in a bush, I think they were really like on the grass on the sidewalk, like not that hidden. I think the previous, either they weren't there during the previous canvas, or they were just like in the snow and were not found is how I gathered that information.
Well, we also saw, was it a bus stop? Was there like a little bus stand right there?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, there was definitely a bus going on Church Street there. Yeah.
Yeah. And we saw the news footage, right, of the body being covered, like coming out. And didn't we see people like at that area in the background next to that little bus stand from that news footage?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to look back.
Either way, that news footage, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of snow there.
Right. Yeah, I think we actually got some conflicting information there too, from the folks who remembered it back then. So if there was snow, there was just a little bit at that time. But yeah, it could have hurt the search afterwards. I don't know when it snowed again, but I do know that it was Thanksgiving weekend. That following Thursday was Thanksgiving, so I think the investigators had a tough time getting in touch with certain people, because of some travel and things like that during Thanksgiving.
Well, I mean, I think probably the smartest serial killers probably do most of their killing in the winter, because in the summer things, bodies they don't keep so well. So, and you can hide evidence in the snow and all that. So, again, this is a guy who must have planned this ahead for a long time.
So what does it tell you that the keys are across the street? That he leaves the building and then throws them across the street?
Yeah, yeah, he must have locked the door behind him, so that somebody couldn't just go in there before, immediately. That would have given him a few days to get out of town, and he just thought, well, just toss them into the snow there, and they'll find them in the spring, which was pretty cavalier, considering everything he had done in terms of preparing for the crime. It seemed like maybe it would have been a smarter thing to throw them in the garbage or something. But whatever. Maybe he wanted that much of it to be found out. I know it's certain because they like reading about their crimes. They like it when they get coverage, and some of them like to throw the investigators a little bone, almost taunting them with these little details.
Yeah, it kind of pisses me off. Does it upset you too?
Well, yeah, I mean, you think the guy's just laughing about it, like, oh yeah, you're never gonna catch me. I'm probably well, my favorite version of that was going back to BTK, sending all these missives to the media. He could have gotten away with all those murders if he had just not sent out discs and letters and stuff. He'd probably still be going about his business right now. But they do like seeing the coverage, and I've read many accounts of serial killers, reading about the murders in the paper and commenting on them. And of course, the people they're surrounded by. I mean, who would ever think that someone they're close to is a serial killer, right? It's just it's that complacency we like to live with. We think of that kind of thing happening to other people, and so yeah, most people, it just doesn't occur to them in a million years that could happen, that someone they know could be responsible for something like that.
Yeah. I just keep like going back to how much time we think that, because Tim says this when he starts talking about Sheila Shepherd and theorizing, is that we know that the killer spent time with her body, but we don't know how much time he spent with her body, but he spent enough time with her body to put a knife in her stomach after she died, to cover her up, to what we think is possible, fold the clothes, take the pictures, not take pictures of her. I mean, steal the pictures, like possess the pictures that she had. That's just a theory. But then now it's time to make the decision. How am I getting out of here? Can I go to the window that's like right there and go down the fire escape? Is that less obvious and conspicuous as opposed to going out the front door, her apartment door, locking it from the outside, having the keys, so he knew where to pick up the keys, and then risking somebody seeing him coming out of her apartment? But someone could see him go down the fire escape and that would register. So I'm sure he's thinking of these things, right? So either way, he takes the keys. So I guess whatever decision he made, whether it was the door unlocking it or the fire escape and going down, it's dark out, he still decides to leave them right next to the house. It's across the street, but it's buying him a little time. Why wouldn't he just keep them? Keep them?
Well, I mean, if it was that time of night and I saw someone climbing out of someone's window onto the fire escape, and I was a tenant, I would definitely think something's up, something's wrong. I mean, if this someone is if they're a welcome house guest, I mean, obviously they're going to leave through the door. So I think he walked out the door and locked it. And again, he put the sheet over her maybe to prevent, the smell that comes from a body that's decomposing, and he wanted to give himself time to get out of Dodge. So yeah, again, because so many serial killers are drifters, because it's the pattern I've noticed about these people. They never seem to hold down jobs for very long. A lot of them drop out of school. They move from town to town. Even when they're not killing people, there seems to be something that a lot of them struggle with in terms of uh, permanency, sticking with things, putting down roots. I've noticed that about a lot of them.
What about patterns? Because there were no similar murders in that area around that time that represented or were right?
Yeah, nothing with post-mortem injuries like Sheila suffered. And this is just me putting on my profiler hat, but I would if that's such a like a rare occurrence, like spending that much time with I would say at least a half an hour the killer spent with Sheila, so spending time like that afterwards. Yeah, there's no other reports like that, like post-mortem injuries, things like that in the area, or too many that I found at all.
Yeah, he probably saw that as like an insurance policy. Like, what if she comes to, what if she starts breathing again? So maybe he just did it just to ensure that she stayed dead.
Why not the heart?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Where did he stab her again?
Right in the stomach, right, like a couple inches below her navel, with her own kitchen knife. It was still in her.
Yeah, her navel. Right. That's interesting. That's because that's right, in the reproductive system in the womb. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's interesting that he chose that part of her body.
And she had a kid. She had a young child.
Yeah.
Who she shared with her ex-husband or husband at the time. She wasn't living with Sheila, the child. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that is one detail that led some people to look at Richard, her ex, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it must have been the murderer had mommy issues or something.
Right.
It's kind of a symbol. Yeah, it's kind of symbolic, But yeah, you're right. I mean, normally I think if a killer was going to stab, well, I've known most serial killers who use knives, they tend to inflict quite a lot of cuts, like in some cases head to toe, or like several of them they stab in a frenzy. But this is just one cut. This was like strategic. So yeah, maybe it was more of a practical decision than anything else. Maybe.
Right, to throw off the investigation, maybe.
Yeah.
One thing that we have learned a little bit about recently, and I'd love to run this by you, Morgan, and your listeners. But the dark world of death fetish has sort of come across our desk recently, and the idea that the killer spent time with Sheila afterwards, tied her up, and even this stab in the stomach is apparently a thing in the death fetish community, where that, like, for example, had the killer taken photos or video of Sheila afterwards, I think that would apparently have some value in that online community.
Yeah, I mean, well, considering that it happened back in 1980, I think it was. Yeah, it was probably harder to traffic those images. So maybe he just did it for himself. But yeah, certainly that's been around for a long time. I actually did an interview with a necrophiliac once. I don't know how legit it is, how legit this guy is. I don't know if he was taking me for a ride or not. He said he had never actually engaged in necrophilia, but it is a fetish. They find skulls attractive, bones. They're turned on by that. And a lot of them get into role play where someone may uh, get made up with, with pale makeup to look like they have a pallor, and they lay still, and the other person relates to them as if they were a corpse. But obviously this guy went for reality in his case. But yeah, there is a whole subculture when it comes to that. That's for sure.
Yeah, we've just learned about this, and while we were kind of delving into Sheila's case again, and yeah, just made us look at the case in a different way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, these the thing about psychopaths is they have a way of objectifying people, and if they do commit murder, a big part of it is objectification. Making taking someone who's alive, who has the ability to reject you, to put you down, or to fight you off, and then making them into something that is inert, that cannot fight back, and they become an object, one that you can do whatever you want with, one that you have power over. That was part of the Unsolved Mysteries Diabolical Minds things. They were talking to some professors, and that's what it's all about. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer said it was all about wanting to own these bodies. He didn't want them to leave him.
What were you saying about the necrophiliac who
He
would have someone lay there?
Yeah, so well, as in terms of having someone lay there, he didn't say that, but I know that's part of the role play of necrophilia, where I mean the person's obviously not dead, but they can maybe put on some makeup to look like they're pale, and the person who the necrophiliac will then, have sex with them, and the other person's completely inert and stiff and unmoving. And so yeah, and I think there is a genre of pornography that involves this fake necrophilia. And again, I think a lot of them have collections of bones, of skeletons. I mean, you can buy real bones online. It's hugely expensive. It's like thousands of dollars for a skull. I looked into it. I'm not a necrophiliac, but I was interested in knowing, like, can you actually buy bones? And it turns out you can, just like how you can buy organs. But
Like, where do you get that, on the dark web or on Amazon?
oh no, these were main. I mean, because ultimately, scientific researchers have access to real bones. So I mean, you can buy them. It's just, I guess, maybe most people would be too afraid of what other people would think about it if you've got real bones in your house, human bones. But yeah, you could buy a real human skeleton, but it'll set you back a lot. It's thousands of dollars.
Wow. Have you ever come across a thing? Have you ever come across a Mickey Mouse watch being a thing in like necrophilia?
A Mickey Mouse watch. I don't know. What you mean, like where they've got like that one thing on their body while they're
Yeah.
otherwise dead? I don't know. I mean, I think usually they're just nude, or maybe they strip them. I don't know which, but
Yeah, just trying
yeah.
to find out if that's like a thing. We had an interview with LaDonna Humphrey and her partner in podcasting, and also a co-author of this book Strangled, and Alicia Lockhart. And there's this weird connection, this really crazy, wild connection. But Alicia responded to an ad to be this guy's like secretary, I guess, and she learned that he was a producer, and then she was like, I think he does clown porn, because there was like, that's what was going on when I went to my interview. And then it turns out that he was taking requests from clients, quote clients, to do these like death fetish videos. And it was very important to this one client that she wore this Mickey Mouse watch, and the Mickey Mouse watch was like the star of the show. Like he needed to pan, like zoom in on it, these slow pans of her arm down to the watch, and he's talking about it, saying like, look at this Mickey Mouse watch, like all passionate. And the reason why she got connected with LaDonna Humphrey is because LaDonna Humphrey is investigating, she's a licensed private investigator, she's investigating the murder of Melissa Witt, who had a Mickey Mouse watch as well. And Melissa Trotter, who is a very similar murder case, also had a Mickey Mouse watch.
Yeah, both of them apparently a very similar watch. And Melissa Witt's watch was taken from her when she was murdered. So I think it's theorized that the killer took that watch. So it sort of became the question of, you know, well, who was this client? Who was this producer? And could there be any connection between those two murders?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it tends to dovetail with the goth subculture, the whole thing with pale skin and black clothing and having being obsessed with death and cemeteries and dead bodies. So I think it tends to me probably be more associated with that. Probably not a lot of Mickey Mouse watches, but yeah, that would be an interesting addition. I remember the comedian Sam Kinison talking about this story. I think it emerged in the late 80s. These people approached a funeral home and said, "We'll pay you to let us have sex with the corpses." So they're around. I will. You know what? I've decided if someone wanted to have sex with my dead body, I would say, "Give me the money now. We'll sign contracts, and after I die, go to it." I mean,
But
if
then they're
I'm
going to kill
dead,
you. They're going to kill you
oh no,
then.
oh no, they don't get to kill me. No, that's not part of
Well,
it.
they're just going to break the rules.
Well, you've opened the
Yeah.
door to
Morgan.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be legal. There has to be like a witness, maybe a notary public or something like that.
Come on. How much money are you going to sell this for?
Well, I'm thinking enough to pay for my funeral. Like I think,
At least that much.
Aim
Yeah.
higher, Morgan.
well, okay, I think an average funeral costs like $10,000 now. So maybe like 50 grand. And if I'm dead, how's it going to affect me, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I see your point there.
yeah.
So how would that pay for your funeral? Who would do that? Who would do that train? Would you just pre-arrange your funeral yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Pre-arrange the funeral, choose the funeral home and everything, the plot, and then so first it has to cover those practical costs, and then there's like profit coming from it too. And I could do it with more than one person.
oh, there you
guess
this is an
so.
industry. Yeah.
Put me in like a container of formaldehyde between encounters, so I don't
Shit.
deteriorate too quickly.
This is a great business model.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like you're setting up conflict though for these people who buy your body services after you die. They're gonna fight over you.
Well, I mean, if only one person wants ownership, they have to pay more money than maybe like 100 grand.
It's more for exclusivity.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess ultimately it would be illegal even if you do give your consent, because by the law, it's considered to be an indignity to a body, even if you are giving permission. So,
Well,
Right.
I feel like there's a movie here, like Weekend at Bernie's meets Indecent Proposal or something.
well, there was actually a Canadian independent film. It's called Kissed, and it's about a female necrophiliac, and it ends with her boyfriend willingly dying so that she can make love to his corpse. It was a very sensitive and spiritual portrayal of necrophilia, but I was kind of dissatisfied because I just don't imagine it's quite so tasteful in real life. So I think it's probably a lot more pornographic, or
I think that's probably the case. Yeah. It's probably the most I've ever thought of it, to be honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
There was a woman like many years ago. I think it was in the 80s. Her surname may have been something like Greenlee, but she was open about being a necrophiliac. She had never actually engaged in it, but she would talk about it openly. So, these people surface every now and then. If you go online, I'm sure you can find anonymous confessions of people saying they like to do it. Because the guy I interviewed, he preferred to stay anonymous. So all of his
Yeah.
answers were generated through like AI voice, and yeah. Well, he
Oh,
talked
really?
about he talked about finding like dead animals and admiring the way they look. He didn't have sex with the animals, but that kind of awoke the fascination with dead creatures and dead entities. And
Right.
How
Yeah,
did you get connected with this guy?
God, I don't remember. I think maybe he contacted me because with this podcast, there has been some mention of necrophilia from time to time. And then maybe I used to do a segment called True Crime News, and I think maybe I might have invited someone to contact me about that. So maybe that's how it came about. But it's an interesting episode, that's for sure. Yeah, I'll send you a link to that if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, please. I'll have to check that out.
I'm just nervous I'll listen to it and then I'll see roadkill and all of a sudden start being like realizing I'm attracted to it.
Yeah.
Well, I think interested or curious in a dead body, curiosity in that, it does not make you attracted to it, I would say. I think, we spoke with a biologist recently, Lance, who she writes for National Geographic. She's very curious about dead bodies. I mean, she's not does not strike me as any kind of necrophiliac or someone who has problems. With
That would be amazing if she was.
Yeah, there's
But
this.
yeah, I think it's kind of normal, to be honest, to be interested in it, but attracted, not normal.
Well, I mean, as a kid, if I ever saw a dead animal, I would definitely stop and stare at it. I'd be fascinated because it just wasn't something you saw every day. There's a great line in the David Cronenberg movie, Dead Ringers. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
One of them says there should be beauty contests for the insides of bodies, like greatest spleen. Yeah.
I think that every time I nail a dog to a tree.
Yeah.
Oh my
Just
God.
kidding. Oh my God.
Well,
Terrible.
when Halloween rolls around, I'm always seeing, home decor ideas. I mean, I like skulls, not in a sexual way, but I find them aesthetically pleasing, and other things related to death and skulls. I mean, given the podcast I've been producing, I guess that would only come natural. But and I have one of those Crystal Head vodka bottles. Those are really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I was disappointed because you can't light a candle in it because it doesn't admit enough air, so it just goes out.
Oh, we're gonna get Dan Aykroyd on the phone about that.
Yeah, they're expensive enough.
Morgan, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
What makes you so sure that Sheila's killer is a serial killer?
Well, he might not be, but there are just it seems like there were signature moves involved here, like the knife after she died, taking so much care. Like this is clearly something that was well thought out over a long period of time. And I think if you would give yourself that much preparation, if it and this is not a guy who lacks impulse control. This is not a guy who lacks impulse control. Clearly, he's very, as it mentions, he was very methodical. And most of the serial killers are like that. They're not, as I mentioned, I mentioned gang bangers who have no impulse control. They'll shoot somebody out in front of McDonald's. These guys, they have it all thought out. And I mean, these days more than ever. I mean, the FBI says, I think there must be like hundreds of active serial killers at any given time. They're just getting better and better at it. And there wasn't nearly as much literature about it back then, but this guy just thought it through very well. And the unfortunate thing about cold cases is that it's like telling a story backwards. You're starting, so the finding the body, that's the last page, but you have to write the story going backwards. And how can you do that? And people can be hard on police saying you're not doing enough, or why haven't you done this or that? But sometimes it's just very hard for them when they have nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely, in Sheila's case, I definitely don't think it's from lack of trying or wanting to find the killer. I think it's hard. I think this is a really bizarre case, and being a detective or an investigator is not easy.
Oh yeah, police work is really tough at that level. When you're investigating cases like that, and sometimes they get, it seems to depend a lot on luck. Actually, there are sometimes they catch someone red-handed. There are murderers who actually confess in the police station, and then you have something like this where In some cases, they don't find any valuable leads until like 50 years later, and sometimes never. So it really actually depends quite a bit on luck. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I came up with this idea, but maybe it infringes on people's personal liberties. But I thought, what if everyone's DNA and everyone in their life gives like blood samples for medical purposes? What if it was legally mandated that that was submitted to law enforcement? Because in that way they could solve cold cases. But on the other hand, maybe that's. Do you think that'd be too much of an infringement on people's freedom, their privacy?
Having it be mandatory.
Yeah, like we've all given like blood samples when we had health problems. What if the government could take all that DNA, and then law enforcement could go back and look at cold cases and find out uh, who committed the crimes based on all this, the huge DNA data bank.
Yeah, I mean, from our privileged position of being, middle-aged white guys with no criminal background, I'd be fine with it. But I just see too many opportunities for corruption. And hey, if you want this person to go away, you can certainly shift something here and something there to make it look like they did something. We see that without any sort
Yeah,
of
yeah,
DNA tampering or lack of evidence or manipulation of evidence.
Yeah.
there could be corruption where they just lie about it and produce
Yeah.
some file that containing someone's DNA when it's not, in fact, the person who's guilty of the crime. But the people
That's
people who do go to prison as innocent, innocent. I mean, that would at least help them to get out of prison. So that would be a good thing. Like the West Memphis Three. I mean, there was
Mhm.
so little evidence, and yet they were all sentenced to death. So
right. Yeah, I think human error as well, even just natural human error would be a big problem there. Filing everybody's DNA in the right box could, 0.2% of those, if those are errors, that's a huge problem. And then of course abuse of power is definitely could be a problem. But I mean, Othram, and there are databases like GEDmatch and DNA Solves that are doing that. If you want your DNA in a database that can be cross-referenced by law enforcement, you can do it right now. You can submit it today.
oh yeah,
So
yeah. Well,
yeah.
I've given mine to Ancestry, so maybe they could find it that way. I don't know if they can subpoena Ancestry, but or 23andMe, but maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know Othram's database is DNA Solves, so they definitely urge everyone who has a DNA profile to upload there. And then I know GEDmatch has an option where you can check a box to submit it to be reviewed by law enforcement if they want to or whatever.
Well, I mean, and it's also a problem that sometimes murderers have no record. They have no criminal record, so their fingerprints are not on file. And there are murderers who only kill one time. That's another complicating factor as well. Maybe he never killed again. Um, and so, you know, there are lots of murderers also who kind of have overlapping patterns as well. So sometimes they're confused with one another, you know, like there are more than one necrophiliac. And so there has to have been other murderers who killed in that fashion, going for strangulation instead of just a gunshot or stab wound, you know, doing that dirty work post mortem. So not a lot of original serial killers.
Right.
All right. So do you guys think they'll ever solve this crime? I'm not. I'm not very optimistic about it. I think they probably exhausted all the resources. The only way at this point would be if somebody happens to know the murderer and they've talked about doing it. But again, I think this guy is probably he's too smart and too secretive to ever do something as stupid to actually admit it to anyone, not even his best friend.
Unless they have some DNA that's sitting there waiting on the waiting to be analyzed. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe they can get connected with Othram and there'll be some sort of answer there. But even if DNA, hypothetically speaking, if they analyze this DNA, I don't know what it's on. So is it on something that would even indicate that this person killed her? You know, because if it's her husband's DNA somewhere in the apartment, well, that doesn't answer it at all. Like, of course, his DNA is probably in the apartment.
Well, yeah, no, it's if I were to if I were to like write a book as an advice book to serial killers on how to get away with murder, I would say make sure you don't run afoul of the law afterwards because they're going to have to get your fingerprints, even if it's a completely unrelated charge. You better stay out of trouble because they'll figure it out eventually.
Right, but that's the thing, isn't it? Those cool down crimes
Oh yeah,
after the
yeah.
fact. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of serial killers have also committed other kinds of crimes because it's just in a criminal's nature to break the rules. And so, they can get involved with theft or traffic offenses, all kinds of things. But maybe not. Dennis Rader was not a criminal in any other way besides murder. So he was a law-abiding person otherwise. So there are exceptions. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I hope this case will get solved. I don't know how it will. It's been over 42 years, so yeah, I guess if there was some fingerprint that would do it, it probably would have happened by now. So I don't know. Maybe there'll be a deathbed confession, or I mean, we do learn that relationships change when people die, and maybe some information will get shared then. But you really want to see justice for Sheila at
Oh
this
yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah. Do you know how her family is taking it? They must have been. Are they involved with trying to solve the crime at all?
I mean, the only person we've directly spoken with was Terry, her aunt. So, and it's really devastated them. I
Yeah.
mean, devastated them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for
Definitely.
sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's and they often not only does the death of their loved one leave a void, but also the fact that if the perpetrator has never been brought to justice, that's another aspect of their life where there's a lack of completion. Going
Yeah.
knowing someone got away with it, that's something that's hard to live with as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's not fair. I mean, unfortunately, no one ever said life was fair, but this feels like it's just a miscarriage of justice. This young woman did not deserve this. She had a young child, who now grows up without a mother. So yeah, it's just tragic.
Well, I guess we shouldn't say, that there's never going to be a solution to this because in watching those episodes of Unsolved Mystery, sometimes they found the perpetrator like 30, 40 years after the crime was committed. It does happen. So yeah, you never know, right?
Yeah, gotta hold out hope, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have a 3:30 thing that we should probably shuffle off.
Oh
to.
yeah, yeah, no problem. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for speaking with me on this case today.
Yeah.
And
Thank you,
I'll
Morgan.
I'll send you that necrophilia interview. And all right.
Yeah,
Wish I
sounds
could
good.
say I'm looking forward to it.